Hilchos Shabbos, Perek Shiva'a Asar. The laws of Shabbos, chapter 17. Today we have one topic. The whole long chapter is about one thing which is called Tikunei Mivo'ot. There's a prohibition to carry from a private domain to a public domain. There's also a prohibition to transfer something for amot in a public domain. Now there are certain places that are very close to a public domain, but they're not actually belonging to the public. The classic example of this, especially in Talmudic times, was what's called a mavoi, an alleyway. You have over here homes. Homes would exist in a chatzer, in a courtyard. The courtyards would open up to an alleyway, that's the mavoi, and the alleyway would open into the public domain. So because it opened right into the public domain, the rabbis were worried that if I let you carry in the alleyway, you'll end up carrying in the public domain. So they required you to what's called tikun mivaot, fix up the alleyway. Put something in the alleyway that's going to allow you to remember that it's a separate area from the public domain. Or in some cases, you can put up something which will even be considered like it's a fourth wall. And now the alleyway is completely closed, in which case you're allowed to carry in the alleyway. That's going to be the topic of today. How do we fix an alleyway? Which type of alleyways can be fixed? And exactly what the mechanisms are to fix them. So here we go. Halacha Aleph. Mavoi sheyesh lo shlosha ktalim. If an alleyway has 3 walls, hu hanikra mavoi satum. That's called a closed alleyway. Like you have over here. The alleyway has 1 wall here, a second wall opposite it, but the 3rd wall is also closed. It's only in one direction that it's open. That's called the mavoi satum. It's enclosed on 3 sides, only open on one. Umavoi sheyesh lo shnei ktalim bilvad. Zeh keneged zeh. But if the alleyway were to have only 2 walls, like in this case, you have 2 thoroughfares, and the alleyway is just 1 wall opposite the other. And both sides it opens to a public domain. People can go in on one side and come out the other. That's called an open alley. And there are different laws. What is the way to permit an enclosed alleyway to be able to carry in a closed alleyway? On the 4th wall, where the 4th wall should be, you make what's called a lechi. A lechi is a short beam that stands where the 4th wall should be, and it counts as a 4th wall. That's one option. Or, another option, oseh alav korah. You place a beam from one end of the open to the other end of the open. Okay, there's a big difference between this way and that way. This way is actually considered to be a 4th wall. When you put a beam, it's not actually considered to be a wall, it's called a heker. It's just a recognition that it's a demarcation. Here's where the alleyway ends and the public domain begins. But they're both viable ways to allow you to carry inside the alleyway. V'dayo, that's enough. V'techashev o ta korah o tolechi ki'ilu satam ruach revi'it. And the beam going across, or the pole standing on the side, will count as if you shut off the 4th direction. In that way, the alley becomes a private domain. And now you can carry in the entire alleyway. Din Torah, says the Rambam, I'll tell you what's behind this rabbinic mechanism. By biblical law, all you need is three walls to allow you to carry biblically. The rabbis were worried. The requirement to shut the 4th wall as well is only rabbinic. And therefore, in this case, it's enough to have just a little pole or a beam to show that we're closing the 4th direction, and now everywhere in the alleyway could be carried in. We'll soon see the Rambam will say, it doesn't actually shut it off from the public domain. See, if it fully became a private domain, now you also wouldn't be allowed to carry from the alleyway to the public domain. But we're going to see if you do it by mistake, you're exempt. Because in a certain way, it's still considered to be one domain. But this is all regarding carrying in the alleyway. If you want to carry in the alleyway, you have to put up either a lechi or a korah, a standing beam or a horizontal beam. It says that Rambam Halacha Gimel, that's all for the closed lane. The he'ach matirin mavoi mefulash, what do you do to an open mavoi? That's the case over here. So you would think you can put just 2 korot, right? One on one side, one on the other. No, says the Rambam. Oselot tzurat petach mikan. On one side, there has to be what's called a tzurat petach. We saw yesterday, that means when you put up 1 pole on one side, 1 pole on the other, and a beam going across. A 3-pronged opening. This is a higher level of a mechitza. It's considered to be an actual partition. So one of the 2 open doors has to be considered halachically closed. And that you do by making a tzurat hapetach. On the other side, ulechi or korah mikan. You can put either a lechi or a korah, as you see kind of in the back. It's kind of like a front view. So if you're looking at an open lane, on one side you would put a 3-pronged tzurat hapetach. On the other side you would put just either the standing beam or the horizontal beam. Umavoy akum, says the Rambam, if you have a crooked alleyway, toratokim mefulash. Even though technically when you're standing on one side, looking across, you see a wall, but since in the end of the day it opens on both sides to the public domain, so you have to treat it like an open alleyway. And you have to make tzurat petach, a 3-pronged opening on one side, and on the other, lechi or korah. Halakha dalid, there are certain alleyways that by nature of the way they're constructed, they're already considered separate from the street. Mavoy, let's say you have an alleyway, shehu shaveh mitocho umidron l'shut harabim. It's flat in the alleyway, and then it diagonally goes out into a public domain, over there. Or the opposite. O shaveh l'shut harabim umidron l'tocho. The public domain ends, and there's a slide to go into the alleyway. So by virtue of this slide, either going outwards or going inwards, einot tzarich lo lechi v'lo korah. It's by default separated from the Reshut HaRabim. It doesn't require a beam vertical or horizontal. Sharehu muvdal Reshut HaRabim, because by its very nature it's separate from the public domain.
Well, the places like that in Jerusalem,
where it goes inwards. Yeah. Halacha hey, here's another option. Mavoy shetzido echad kalel layam, v'tzido echad kalel la'ashpa shel rabim. You have an open alleyway, open on both sides, but the opening is to a place which is considered to be a partition. On one side you have a sea, or a river. On the other side, you have a massive garbage heap. So over here, it's also considered by default separate from the public domain, but there is a little bit more of a worry, because what happens if the sea gets more shallow? If it fills up with sand, it's going to be less than 10 tfachim. What happens if somebody clears away the garbage? Nevertheless, says the Rambam, over here you also don't have to worry. If an alleyway opens one side to the sea and the other side to the public garbage heap, it also doesn't require anything. Because the public garbage heap is never going to be fully cleared away. And we also don't worry, perhaps some mud will wash up in the sea and make the sea shallower than 10 tfachim. No, we can assume that it's going to stay in the default status. And these two can serve as proper mechitzot to demarcate the alleyway from the public domain. Halacha vav, another situation. Mavoy mefulash. You have an open lane. Shuhu kaleh le'emtza rechava shel rabim. So pay attention, there's 3 units of space over here. This is the alleyway leading into the courtyards. There you have what's called a rechava, backlot, which is less used than an alleyway. Also belongs to the public. And behind it, you have an actual public domain. Now, this is an open lane, and unlike the open alleyway of before, on both sides it doesn't open to a public domain. On this side it does, but on the other side it first opens to a public lot, which then opens to a public domain. So now, says the Rambam, there's a little bit more room for leniency. Im lo haya mechuvan keneged petach harechava. If the two openings were not aligned, the opening of the open alleyway and the opening of the public lot to the public domain are not aligned, harei zeh kisatum. Then it's considered to be closed. Even though the actual alleyway is open on both sides, but the back wall makes it considered closed, and you only have to put something on this side. If it was exactly aligned, then you would have to put, because it would be like an open lane. But here, because it's technically closed on the back, so you're good on that side. But let's say it would open into the sides of the back lot. In other words, the side of the alleyway and the side of the back lot are directly aligned. You see, look, contrast here. It's open right into the lot, and the wall is over here. But in this case, the alleyway is open into the back lot directly. It opens to the side of the alleyway, of the back lot, I'm sorry. Says the Rambam asur. Because over here we do consider it to be like an open alleyway, and you have to put something on both sides. And if the back lot wasn't public, it was private, asur. Even in the case where it opened to the middle of the lot, it would also be forbidden, because when an individual owns the back lot, he can do whatever he wants. Maybe he's going to build more houses over here, and it's going to turn out that the alleyway is opening to the side of the back lot, in which case it's considered like an open alley, and you have to put stuff on both sides. So to summarize, you have 3 cases. One case is that it opens to the middle of a back lot. That is only requiring tikkun on this side. Other case, it's opening to the side of the backlot. That requires fixing on both sides. And if it's a private backlot, then even if it opens to the middle, you also have to put stuff on both sides for fear that he might build a new home. Halacha Zayin says that Rambam ein hamavoy nitar belechi o korah ad sheyiyu batim v'chatzerot tuchot letocho. If you want to be able to fix an alleyway by putting a vertical or horizontal beam, there's a couple of conditions. First of all, there has to be homes and courtyards, both lashon rabim in the plural, at least 2 homes and at least 2 courtyards opening into it. Somewhat of a debate of what this means. Some commentaries say it means literally 2 homes, 2 courtyards. Some say it means 2 homes in each of the 2 courtyards, and others say it means there has to be 2 courtyards plus 2 homes. 2 homes in the actual alleyway. So 3 options, but the idea is there has to be at least 2 homes and 2 courtyards. The length of the alleyway has to be at least 4 cubits, about 6 feet. It has to be rectangular, the length has to be more than the width. And that's what allows it to be an alleyway which can be fixed. Well, let's say you had this case, an alleyway which was square. Its length is like its width. It's considered like a courtyard. The einon nitar, and it cannot be permitted by the regular 1 beam this way or that way. It needs ela bishnei lechayayim mishnei ruchotav. It needs to have 2 beams, 1 on each side. 2 lechis right there. Kol lechi b'mashahu. Each beam can be any size. Or bepas rachav arba'a miruach achat. Or on one side you're going to put a wider beam, not just a regular standing beam. It has to be at least 4 tfachim, which is about 16 inches in width. Because now the alleyway looks more like a courtyard, which more people would use. And you have to more clearly demarcate it with either 2 lechis or 1 wider lechi. Tefach, they say it's about 4 inches each. I figure 4 tefachim is about 6 inches, 16 inches, 12 inches. Great. Halacha chet. Chatzer she'orka yater al rochba. If you have a regular courtyard, not the alleyway, the courtyard where the homes are in this area, that's length is bigger than its width. Harehi kemavoy, it's like an alleyway, v'niteret belechi o korah, and you can simply permit the carrying in it by putting a beam this way or that way. Umavoy she'ein batim v'chatzerot p'tuchot letocho. What happens if you have an alleyway which doesn't meet this requirement? It doesn't have homes and courtyards open into it. It's a smaller alleyway. Let's say it only had 1 house or 1 courtyard. Or it's a very short mavo. Where's my picture here? I don't have it. Okay. It's a very short alleyway. Doesn't even have the length of 6 feet. It follows the same laws as the courtyard, and you have to have 2 lechis, 1 on each side, or a wider lechi, which is at least 4 tfachim, somewhere between 12 and 16 inches in length. What about, that's the length. What about the width? What if the alleyway is super narrow? This is a very wide alleyway. You have a super narrow alleyway. It's less than 3 tfachim in width. Doesn't require any fixing. Not a standing beam, not a cross beam. You can carry in the entire thing. We've seen this rule many times. You have an area less than 3 tfachim, it's considered to be attached. Here comes the line mentioned before. If you do put a cross beam across a mavoy, even though technically you can now carry in the entire alleyway like a private domain, the beam doesn't make it exactly like a private domain. If you throw from it into the public domain or from the public domain into it, patur, you're still exempt. Because the beam is only there as a recognition. It's not an actual partition. But if you koshered the alleyway by putting a vertical beam, then it makes a literal 4th wall. Now if you throw from it to the public domain or public domain to it, chayav, you're liable. Because the lechi, the standing beam, is considered to be a veritable mechitza, an actual 4th wall on the 4th side. Now, we're going to talk about for a second, and then go back to the original topic, what's called tikkun reshut harabim. Till now we're talking about making alleyways kosher to carry in. What about an actual public domain? How can you make an actual public domain permissible to carry in? It says that Rambam malacha yud shnei ktalim reshut harabim. You have 2 walls in the public domain. People pass through. Tons of people pass through. Ketzad machshir beinehem. How do you make the area between, in other words, the area between these 2 walls, how do you make it kosher to carry there? Osed latot mikan, ud latot mikan, says the Rambam, you have to make doors on each side. No standing beams, no cross beams are enough. Actual doors. Reshut hayachid, and only then is it considered the area between them to be a private domain. You don't have to actually lock the doors at night, but they have to be able to be locked. And therefore, for example, the doors were sunken into dirt, and they can't move, you have to clear away the dirt, fix them to allow them to be closed, and once they're capable of being closed, now it's a kosher Reshut harabim. But to simply use the three-pronged opening or a standing beam or a cross beam, those don't help to make a public domain kosher. They help to make an alley kosher, but not a full-on public domain.
Maxim will work?
A blockage? Like a barricade? Saying not like a door this way, but like a door like...
No.
Oh, those thin ones? No. No. Has to be full-on doors. Full-on doors. Returning now to the laws of the mavoi. Says the Rambam, mutar letaltel b'mavoi tachat hakora o ben halechayayim. What happens, you have an alleyway, right? So you've koshered the whole alleyway. But what about the area exactly under the crossbeam or opposite the vertical beam? Says the Rambam, that also is allowed to carry. You can carry in the alleyway under the crossbeam or between the standing beam and the wall. But when do we say that? When the area right next to the alleyway was a public domain, and you're trying to separate the alleyway from the public domain. But if it was right next to an area which would biblically not be forbidden, it was a Carmelit, let's say it was open to a sea, you cannot carry under the crossbeam or between the vertical beams, till you put up another vertical beam to specifically allow carrying in that area. Here we have a very important rule in halakha. One type found the other type and it wakes up. What this means is, sometimes halakha can convert an entity to sleep. Let's say you put in, a little milk into a chalent by mistake. The Torah says the milk falls asleep. There's no more milk in the meat. But let's say you would pour in more milk into the chalent, and now there's too little meat against the milk. So we say that the second milk that's poured in finds the first milk which is sleeping, and now it wakes up. And the first milk also combines to make the whole chalent forbidden. Same thing over here. You have an alleyway which is considered to be like a Carmelit. If it's open to a Carmelit, so the two Carmelits combine and they wake up. And now the space under the crossbeam cannot be carried in. If it's open to a public domain, so the beam puts the whole area to sleep. Now it's sleeping. But if it's open to another Carmelit, the Carmelit finds the Carmelit, and boom, like these two guys, they wake up, and they combine to make both areas forbidden. You have to put up another lechi, which allows for the area under the crossbeam to be carried in. Halacha yud bet.
For that side.
Right, just for that area.
Because then you make them both fall asleep.
Then you make them both fall asleep, exactly. Special mechanism to make each area fall asleep. Halacha yud bet bakol osin lechayayim. This standing beam, this vertical beam, can be made out of anything. Afilu b'davar sheyesh bo ruach chayim. You could even use a live thing. Put an animal there. V'afilu b'isurei hanaya. Even things which typically a Jew cannot derive benefit from, it's kosher. Avodat kochavim u'mazalot atzma or asherah. Let's say you have an actual idol statue or a tree that was worshipped for idols, she'asa tolechi, which you made it into the vertical beam next to the alleyway. Kasher, it's kosher. Shehalechi ovyo kolshu, because by legal terms, the vertical beam doesn't have to have an amount. It could be the minutest amount. So even avodah zarah, which legally is considered to be nothing, but it's a mashahu, so it's kosher to be used. But that's all for the lechi, for the vertical beam. Gova halechi en pachot me'asarat tvachim rachbo v'ovyo kolshu. The height has to be at least 10 tvachim, but its thickness and its width could be anything. Halachayud gimel bakol osin korah. The cross beam can also be made out of anything. Avalo ba'asherah. But over here, you cannot use actual idol worship tree. Because even the width of the beam has a measurement. Anything which has a legal entity cannot be used when it's coming from an idol worship tree. The width of the beam is no less than 1 tefach, 3-4 inches, and its thickness could be anything. But it has to be healthy, strong enough to be able to hold a half a brick. Ariach is the term in halacha, Levena, which means a brick, was 3 tvachim by 3 tvachim square. An ariach was half of that, 3 tvachim by 1.5 tvachim. So long as this beam is strong enough to hold a brick that's the size of 3 tfachim by 1.5 tfachim, that's good. Uma'amidei korah, let's say you put the crossbeam not directly onto the two walls, but you used some help, some supports. So you have two supports, and on the supports you put the beam. So those supports, tzrichin sheyiyu bri'in kedei lekabel korah vechatzi levena. They have to be healthy enough to hold the crossbeam and the technical, theoretical half brick. We're going to soon see these supports have to be this way. They have to be right next to the wall. If you put supports coming out of the walls, and on that you put the beam, it's not okay. But here the crossbeam still goes directly over both walls, so it's fine.
So you have to put a brick on it when you're constructing it to check?
Ideally, yeah. You have to know. Yeah, well, you have to know that it can hold that brick. The Talmud even says that the way you would do it is you would actually attach some mud on the sides of the beam, because the beam could be just one tefach. It has to hold a tefach and a half of brick. So you could put some mud next to, in the middle of the beam, and that way it becomes the actual surface for the full tefach and a half. How big does the opening? We've talked about the length of the mavoy, the width of the mavoy, now what the height? How high does the alleyway have to be that it's enough to kosher it with a standing beam or a cross beam? The height can be no less than 10 tfachim and no more than 20 amot, about 30 feet high. Otherwise it's too high. And the opening can be anywhere up to 10 amot wide, 15 feet wide. Let me see if I have a picture here. When do we say that these measurements are what makes it or breaks it? If you don't have a three-pronged shape of an opening. But if you put up not just one vertical beam or one cross beam, put up three beams, pole, and another pole, even if it's 100 amot tall, I don't care how tall it is, or pachot me'asara, or less than 10 tefachim, or achav mea, or 100 amot wide, harez mutar, it's all permitted because you've made an actual surat petach to show that it's an actual door. Yeah, I guess you could see something over here. You have the alleyway. See, the alleyway's height is less than 10 tefachim. Even if the rest of the walls are higher, but the actual alleyway has very low walls. Or if you made steps going into it so that the height is now less than 10 tefachim. These are all cases where you cannot make a standing beam or a vertical beam. You'd have to put up a surat petach, a three-pronged opening. Let's say you had some designs. On the crossbeam, you made it very colorful, or you engraved in it. It's going to attract everyone's attention. They're all going to look at it. Even if the opening of the alleyway is higher than 20 amot, it's kosher. Because remember, the whole idea of the crossbeam is to get you to recognize that it stops here. Technically, if it's higher than 20 amot, you don't see it, like a sukkah. A sukkah can't be also 30 feet high, because you don't see the schach. The korah can't be 20 amot high, because you won't see the korah. But if it's very attention-attracting, if it has the pictures and engravings, people will look at it. And the same recognition is accomplished. What happens if you have an alleyway, it's super tall? From the ground to the bottom of the beam is already 20 amot. And the thickness of the beam stands higher than 20 amot. Since the opening of the alleyway is still under 20, kasher, it's kosher. What happens if you have a very tall alleyway, higher than 20 amot? And you wanted to make a threshold. You're going to put a beam on the bottom that's now going to make the space of the opening less than 20 amot tall. Says the Rambam, that bottom beam has to also be at least one tefach, about 3-4 inches thick, like the beam that you would put on top. That's a very tall alleyway. What about a very low alleyway? Tiny alleyway, less than 10 tefachim tall. You dig a hole that's at least 4 by 4 amot, and the depth brings it to now being 10 tefachim tall, and now you can kosherize the alleyway by putting a lechi or a korah, and it's no problem. What happens if the alleyway breaks down? An opening was created in the wall of the alleyway on the front half, towards its head. So long as at the head there remains a board that's at least 4 tefachim wide, mutar, the whole alleyway remains permitted. So long as the opening here is not greater than 10 amot, at 15 feet. So 2 conditions: smaller than 10 amot breakage, remaining 4 tefachim of board. V'im lo nishar pas arba'a. But if the remaining board was not 4 tvachim, asur, then it's forbidden. Ela im ken hayta hapirtza pachot mishlosha. Unless the opening was less than 3 tvachim, a tiny opening, shakol pachot mishlosha kilavud, in which case less than 3 tvachim is considered to be attached, and it's all no problem because the wall never is considered to be broken. Halacha yudchet, another case of 3 spaces. We have an alleyway, behind it we have a courtyard, and behind that we have a public domain. Nifratz hamavoy bimlo'o lechatzer, v'nifritza chatzer kenegdo l'shut harabim. An alleyway broke into a courtyard, and the courtyard broke into the public domain. Harei zeh asur. Now the alleyway becomes forbidden to be carried in, because now it's converted from a closed alleyway to an open alleyway. But the courtyard, even though it has holes, mutaret, it's still allowed to carry there. Because even if you have a courtyard where many people go through this way and that way, since they're meant for private dwellings, it remains a private domain. Nothing can violate that. Of course, the commentaries say the opening cannot be more than 10 amot. If the opening is more than 10 amot, the whole courtyard walls are considered to be broken. We're talking about a case where we have less than 10 amot breakage. Then the opening makes no difference. The courtyard is still considered to be a private domain. Okay. The alleyway is a problem because the alleyway is open to the public. That's now you have to put, you have to fix both sides. But the courtyard remains okay to carry in. Halacha yutet, a little more complex case now. Mavoy shehayulo shvilim mitzad zeh u'shvilim mitzad acher. Till now we talked about an alleyway which is only one lane. What happens if you have a multi-lane alleyway? Here's the alleyway, it opens, but each alleyway opens into little alleyways that all connect to the public domain. If you're standing on this edge looking straight, you don't see any opening, it looks like a closed alley. But the moment you step in and look down those lanes, now these are all open lanes to the public domain. Even if they aren't aligned, as you see in this picture. This one opens to that. That one opens here. They're not aligned. Nevertheless, each one is considered to be an alleyway that's open on both sides to the public. Why? Remember earlier in the chapter we saw that a crooked lane, an L-shaped lane, is considered to be open. So over here also, in a certain way, if you draw the shape nicely, maybe I have it here even. Let's see. There you see a gray shape. Technically, it's open on both sides, even if it's crooked. So you would have to fix technically both sides of every lane. Nevertheless, says the Rambam, there's an easier way out. How do you kosherize this type of alleyway, multi-alley alleyway? Oset surat petach lechol echad ve'echad min hashvilim shebatzad ha'echad v'chin lapetach hagadol. What you do is like this. On the one side, let's call it that side, you make 3-pronged proper surat petach, and also on the big opening. So now those are considered to be full walls. And then on the other side, not on the other side of each individual alleyway, on the other side of the whole alleyway, and all the paths on the second side get a simple vertical or horizontal crossbeam, and that's enough to make the entire alley kosher. You need to have at least on one side the Tzurat Petach to make an actual wall, but on the other side you only have to have one thing. Other commentators say you have to have something on each side of each alleyway. It's a little more crazy. But according to the Rambam, you only need it on the 2 extremities, and that's fine. We're going through a bunch of cases, marathon, I get it, it's a little bit hard to follow, but just a bunch of halachas, okay? You have an alleyway which one side is longer than the other. Where do you put the crossbeam? Says the Rambam, you cannot put a diagonal crossbeam. You put the crossbeam at the place where the shorter wall ends. Another similar case, you have a regular alleyway, and instead of putting the vertical beam at the edge, you put it in the middle. Sorry. If you put up a lechi halfway through the alleyway, whatever is passed beyond the lechi, you can carry there. And the outer half, outside the lechi, is forbidden. It should be obvious, but the commentaries say you might think you should be worried that since in one alleyway there's 2 different areas, you might carry from one area to the other. No, we're not. You put up the vertical crossbeam, the vertical beam, wherever you put it up, that's where the koshering begins. Past that you can carry, before that you cannot carry.
So one of the sides of the house can carry only in their half?
Basically.
Another can only carry.
in the inside half, exactly.
Kind of like the defeats like that.
Huh?
It defeats all that.
Well, it allows just for those two courtyards to carry in half of the
They
alleyway.
have to carry that, and like those two neighbors carry those to each other, and those two to each other, but then like the two like.
No, the two on the bottom cannot carry to each other because they can't carry in the alleyway. Since they're before the lechi,
Oh, so they can't carry it all.
they can carry it all, exactly.
Only the back
It
two.
only helps the inner half of the alleyway. Halacha chaf aleph. Mavoi shu rachav 20 amah. You have a very wide alleyway. Let's say it's 20 amot wide. It's too wide. You can't put a lechi or a korah there, it's too big. But you can make it smaller in two ways. Either oseh pas gavoa 10 tfachim b'meshech 4 amot. Take a board, 10 tfachim tall, 4 amot wide, shehu shiur meshech hamavoy, which is the minimal depth of an alleyway, uma'amido b'emtza, and you put it in the middle. So now you've created two alleyways. You have two alleyways. The door of each one is only 10 amot. That's fine. Now you can put a crossbeam across both. Or another option is, marchik 2 amot mikan. You go 2 amot of space and put up a board that's 3 amot this way, and the same on the other side. Marchik 2 amot mikan, uma'amid pas 3 amot, umarchik 2 amot mikan, uma'amid pas 3 amot mikan. So 2 amot of space, 3 amot of wall. V'nimtza petach hamavoy 10 amot, and now the inner opening is only 10 amot because you've taken off 5 from here and 5 from there. V'hatzdadin arein kistumin, and the open sides are considered to be closed. Sharei omed mirubeh parutz. Yesterday we had the rule that if you have a partition where the standing area is more than the broken area doesn't count. It counts as closed. So since you have 3 versus 2 on this side, 3 versus 2 on that side, the 2 is considered to be closed. Now that you have 5 closed here and 5 closed there, you only have 10 open in the middle. 10 open in the middle is fine. You could put up a lechi or a korah. Halacha chav bet. Lechi habolet midofno shel mavoy. What happens if you have a vertical beam, but it's part of the construction of the wall? It's just sticking out from the actual wall of the alleyway. Kasher, that's kosher. The lechi ha'omed me'ilav. What happens if you have a lechi that's there on its own? That means that it's just, it was constructed, but not for the purpose of being a lechi. Im samchu alav mikodem Shabbat kasher. If somebody pointed to that and said, you know what, we're going to use this Shabbos to be our lechi, that's kosher. If not, they put up another lechi, and that lechi, let's say, fell down in the middle of Shabbos. Now you can't say, oh, we have that lechi standing, it's still good. No, because it's there on its own. It wasn't made for the purposes of being a lechi. The lechi shu nira mi bifnim lechi, or mi bachutz eino nira lechi. What happens if you have a beam that can only be seen on the inside, but not on the outside? That's the case in the top right corner. If you're standing inside, you can see that the wall extends as an extra lechi. But if you're standing outside, you don't see a lechi, you just see continuation of the wall. Or the opposite, only on the outside you can see that it's a beam. And from the inside, the wall seems to continue as though there is no lechi. Now this case is a big argument. There's 3 explanations on what this means. Either the simple meaning, like that one over there. If you're standing inside, the wall just continues. If you're standing outside, you can see this little bump. That's seen on the inside, not seen on the outside. I'm sorry, that's seen on the outside, not seen on the inside. The other option is here. It's the opposite case. On the outside, you can see that something was added. On the inside, if you're standing over here, you won't see this piece since it's further in. And the third explanation is this one. It's part of the wall, turning out of the alleyway. All these 3 cases, says the Rambam, nidon mishum lechi. It's all considered to be a lechi. Even if you can see it only in one direction, that counts. That's enough to be the vertical beam, and it kosherizes the mavoi. Lechi shehig bihomina karka, shloshat tfachim. Let's say you have a cross beam. You didn't put it all the way from top to bottom. You lifted it 3 tfachim from the ground. O shehi fligo mina kotel shlosha. Or you moved it away from the wall, 3 tfachim. Lo asa klum, it doesn't count for anything. It's not considered to be attached. Aval pachot b'shloshat tfachim. But if it's less than 3 tfachim of space between the ground or between the wall, kasher, then it's kosher. The Rambam returns to this rule. Shekol pachot mishlosha kelavut. Less than 3 tfachim is considered to be attached. Lechi shahaya rachav harbe, in this case. A very wide lechi. You put up a board, basically. Ben shahaya rochbo pachot mechatzi rochav hamavoy. Ben shahaya rochbo kachatzi rochav hamavoy. Whether it was less than half of the width of the alleyway, exactly half of the width of the alleyway, kasher, it's kosher, v'nidon mishum lechi, and it's treated as a vertical beam. Avalim haya yater al chatzi rochav hamavoy. But if it was more than half the width of the alleyway, nidon mishum omed mirubeh ala parutz. Now it's treated as even a greater wall. not just the beam. It's treated as a full wall because the standing space is more than the broken space. That all covers the laws of the vertical beam. Now the cross beam. Halacha chav gimel. Korah sheperas alea machzelet. You have a cross beam and you put over it a reed mat. It's more of a color picture here. You can see it in black and white. So you don't really see the cross beam. Now you just see a massive reed mat hanging over. Harei bitla. That cancels the power of the cross beam. Shaharei enan nikeret, because you can't see it. The whole point of the cross beam is to look at it and remember it. Here you don't see the cross beam. Lefichach, therefore, im hayta machzelet mesuleket min haaretz shlosha tefachim o yeter. If the reed mat was 3 tefachim or more higher than the ground, enan mechitza, it doesn't count as a partition at all. Na'at shtei teidot, but of course, if it was less, then it's okay because you have a full wall. Na'at shtei teidot b'shnei kotlei mavoy mibachutz v'iniach aliyana korah. Here's what I mentioned before. You didn't put the crossbeam over the walls. You stuck out 2 pegs out of the walls, and on that you put the crossbeam. Lo asa klum. Doesn't count for anything. Shetzarich liot hakorah al gabei hamavoy lo samuch lo. The crossbeam has to be on top of the alleyway, not next to the alleyway. Halacha chav dalid korah yotza mikotel zeh ve'ina noga b'kotel hasheni. Couple of cases of random crossbeams. You have a crossbeam that goes from one wall, doesn't reach the other wall. If we have 2 beams, achat yotza mikotel zeh, ve'achat yotza mikotel zeh, ve'inan magod zelazu, 2 cross beams, going from each wall, but there's space in the middle. Pachot mishlosha, if that space is less than 3 tefachim, eino tzarich la'avi korah acheret, no other beam is required. Haya b'nei shlosha, but if there's a bigger space of 3 tefachim, tzarich la'avi korah acheret, another beam is required. Halacha chaf hei v'chein shtei korot hamatimot, if you have 2 beams going parallel to each other, but they're thinner than required. Lo bazu kedei lekabel ariach, v'lo bazu kedei lekabel ariach. Each one doesn't have enough strength to hold that brick that we saw before. Im yesh bishtehen kedei lekabel ariach, but both together could hold the brick up. Eino tzarich la'avi korah acheret, no other beam is required. To the point, says the Rambam, hayta achat lemata ve'achat lemala. Let's say you had 2 cross beams at different heights. See, one is higher than the other. Halachically, we just make as if they're even. Ro'ina ta'elyona ki'ilu hi lemata, or v'hatachtona ki'ilu hi lemala. We see the top one going lower, the bottom one coming higher, and we just say, if these 2 were on level ground, if these 2 were on the same level, ubilvad, so if the 2 are on the same level and they can hold the brick, then they're good. Ubilvad shelo tiyeh elyona lemala me'asrim, v'lo tachtona lemata me'asara. Of course, the top one can't be higher than 20 amot, the bottom one can't be less than 10 tefachim, but if they're in the same realm, you bring them up. And also there cannot be a distance of 3 tefachim. In the imaginary world, if we would lift this korah, the lower one, to the height of the higher one, would there be a distance of 3 tefachim? If there is, it's still bad. If there isn't, that's good. So even if they're on different heights, we treat them as if they're on the same height. In halacha, it's called chavot reni, lower and lift. Treat them as if they're on the same level. And if they're strong enough to hold the brick at the same level, they're good. Halacha chavav hayta korah akuma. One of the conditions of the crossbeam is that it has to be able to hold a brick. But what if it's an arch? No brick can sit on an arch. We visualize it as if it was flat. Agula, same thing if it's round. A perfectly round beam, it's not going to hold a flat brick. We treat it as if it's square. And the rule of pi teaches us that if the circumference is 3 tefachim, it has a width of 1 tefach. It's like 3.14, but the sages they would round it. Circumference of 3 has a diameter of 1. What if the crossbeam was lying and a part of it was crooked out of the length of the mavoy? Either way. It's crooked outwards, it's crooked upwards, it's crooked downwards. Ro'in, we check. Kol she'ilu yinatel ha'ikum v'yisha'aru shnei rasheha en bein zeh lazeh shlosha. Let's say you would take away that part of the crookedness. Remove it from the beam. If the open space now created is less than 3 tefachim, eino tzarich la'avi korah acheret, you don't have to bring, another beam. V'im lav, if not, tzarich la'avi korah acheret, another beam is required because it's too much space between the 2 edges. Now we move on to another similar concept, to an alleyway, not exactly an alleyway. It's what's called pasei be'er, the boards of a well. It's a special rule the rabbis made so people traveling to Yerushalayim for holidays can have water to drink. There were public wells on the roads, and on Shabbos you can't really bring your animal to drink from the well, unless you enclose the well with some partitions. But if you put up 4 walls around the well, now no animals can get in. So the rabbis were extremely lenient, and they created what's called pasei be'er, the borders of the well. It says the Rambam, be'er she'asa la, shmona pasin me'arba zaviyot. If you have a well for which you constructed 8 boards on the 4 corners, 2 little boards on each corner. Shnei pasin dvukin b'chol zavit. 2 borders stuck to each other, 2 boards sticking each other on each corner. Harei elu ki mechitza. The rabbis treated this as a full wall. Even though in every direction there's more open space than standing space, since the 4 corners are there, you can fill water from the well, you can give your animal to drink from the well, that's okay. And how tall does each board have to be? 10 tfachim tall, and the width, 6 tfachim. Each board has to be a width of 6 tfachim. Uben kol pas lepas, between each board, kimlo shtei revakot shel arba'a bakar, can be a maximum of 2 pairs of 4 cows together. Achat nichneset va'achat yotza. One going in, one going out. You see 8 cows. 8 cows, 4 this way, 4 going that way. Shiur rochav zeh ein yater al 13 amah u'shlish. The rabbis measured it. It's about 13 amot and a third. That's how much space there has to be between the boards. If there's more space than that, we're going to soon see the Rambam will say, just put up another board, small board in the middle. But till 13 amot of space, you're good. Halacha chavchet, what happens if you don't have any boards? In one of the corners, or in each of the corners, you had even gedola, a massive stone, right there in the bottom left. O ilan, or a tree. O tail, or a mound of earth. Hamitlaket asara mitoch 4 amot, that reaches a height of 10 tfachim from an incline of 4 amot. Or chavila shel kanim, or a package of reeds. So these are not an actual board, but we see how big they are. Ro'in, we check. Kol she'ilu yechalek. If I can cut it down to size. V'yesh bo amal lekan v'amal lekan begova asara. There'll be an amma, that's just 6 tfachim this way, 6 tfachim that way at a height of 10 tfachim. See here? You're cutting into the tree. Imagine you would cut into the tree and you can create that kind of L-shaped board, or the package of reeds, or the stone, same thing. As long as you can cut out a board that's the permissible size, nidon mishum zavit sheyesh ba shnei pasim. It's treated as a corner that has 2 boards. Similarly, if you have chamisha kanim, if you have 5 reeds that you put up in place of a board, ve'en bein zel azeh shlosha, between each reed there isn't a full space of 3 tfachim, ve'yesh b'neihen 6 tfachim lekan, v'shat tfachim lekan, and between all 5 reeds, you now have a space created of 6 tfachim this way, 6 tfachim that way. Nidonim mishum zavit sheyesh ba shnei pasim. You can treat it as a corner that has 2 boards. The rabbis were extremely lenient in this case. Whatever it takes to make these boards, it's okay. Halacha chavtet mutar lahakriv arba hazaviyot ha'il la'be'er. You can bring these boards, these L-shaped boards, as close as you want to the well. V'hu shetiyeh para rosha v'ruba lifnim min hapasim b'shota. So long as there's enough room for a cow, a head of a cow, and most of its body to be on the inside of the boards. Afal pisha lo yochaz rosha behema ima kli shabo hamayim. Even if you won't end up holding the head of the animal and the bucket together, ho'il v'rosha v'ruba bifnim mutar afilu legamal. Since the head and most of the body of the cow can fit inside, it's permitted, and it's permitted to use even a bigger animal like a camel that only its head would fit inside. Hayu krovim yater mizeh. But if the boards were so close to the well that a cow cannot fit the majority of its body inside, asur lahashkot man, you cannot feed water from there, afilu lagdi, even to a goat shehu kulo nichnas lifnim, which is small enough to fully fit inside, because that's the amount as a cow. Umutar laharchik kol shehu. You can make the walls as distant from the well as you want. Ubilvad sheyarbeh bepasim shutim. Here you see, as long as you put up more boards at every interval of 13 and a third amot, put up another board. You put it on each direction, so that between each board there won't be a space more than 13 and a third amot. Halacha lamed, the 30th halacha. Lo hitiru hapasim ha'elu ela be'eretz Yisrael ulebehemat olei regalim bilvad. The sages only permitted to use these boards in Israel and for the animals of those going to visit the temple for Yom Tov. V'hu, and another condition, sheyeh be'er mayim chayim shel rabim. It has to be a public wellspring, not a pit that someone poured water into. It has to be a natural wellspring. Aval b'shar haratzot, but in other lands, not in Israel, adam yered la be'er v'yishteh. If you have a well of water, you got to go down there and drink. Or make a proper partition around the well. 10 tvachim tall on each side. Stand inside the partition, draw water and drink. If the well was very wide, nobody can go into it, you can't climb into it easily. And even outside of Israel, you can construct this board thing and drink water from there. If it's a pit, not a natural wellspring belonging to the public, or if it is a wellspring but it belongs to a private individual, even if it's in Israel, you cannot fill water from them unless you make a proper partition of 10 tvachim tall. If you are bringing your animal in and you're filling up water for it in between the boards, if you're using a bucket, you can take the bucket and put it down in front of her. No worries of carrying the bucket outside of the area. But if it's a massive trough, whose head, one edge, enters the area of the boards, and it was proper 10 tvachim tall, 4 tvachim wide, so that the trough assumes an identity of its own. It's a private domain unto its own. In this case, don't pick up water with the bucket and put the bucket in front of the animal. Because maybe the trough will get ruined. And you're going to put the bucket into the trough to fix it. And you're going to bring the trough, the bucket from the trough, to the actual public domain. You simply pick up water with the bucket and pour it right into the trough, and let the animal drink on its own. These boards are so powerful, they make this area in between the boards a full private domain. If you throw something from the public domain into this area of the boards, you're liable. Since on each corner there's a full mechitza, it has a height of 10 tfachim, a width and length of more than 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim, and the square is clear, the demarcation of the square, everybody can see it. So everything inside it becomes a private domain. Truth is, even if you made this thing, these 4-pronged L-shaped walls, without a well, it's also considered to be a closed area. Because in every direction there's a board this way and a board that way. Even if the public passes through these boards, it doesn't cancel the power of the boards. It's like a courtyard, a regular courtyard, where the public passes through. It still remains a private domain. And if you throw into it, you're liable. And if there was an animal there, you can feed it between the boards. So if there was a well there, like a regular case. Top case here. If you have a courtyard whose one edge enters this area between the boards, you can transfer from one domain to the other because they're considered to be part and parcel of one same private domain. But if there's 2 separate courtyards, since these 2 courtyards cannot carry one into the other till they make an eruv, they also cannot carry into the area between the boards. They're forbidden from carrying till they mix, till they make an eruv. What happens if the well dries up on Shabbos? You can no longer carry between the boards. The only reason these boards have a power of a mechitza is because of the water. The water goes away, the whole power of the mechitza goes away. What happens if you have these 4 boards with a dry well, and then water begins to flow into the natural wellspring in the middle of Shabbos? Now it's mutar. Now you can carry here. Because even if a partition is constructed on Shabbos, shema mechitza, it's considered a legal partition. If you have an alleyway, you put up the beam, the vertical or the cross beam, and it was taken away on Shabbos. Asur, now it's forbidden to carry there. Afal pisha nifratz the Carmelit, even if it's open now to a Carmelit, not to a full public domain, it's still forbidden.
Sorry, 1 second on that one.
On this one?
Yeah. So the Mavoy is considered a Carmelit?
Yes.
Okay. And that's why, so in a normal, if there's no like Mavoy or anything, and there's just 4 walls and no well, that's still considered a private domain?
Yeah.
But
if you made it with no well, but if there was a well and it dried up, then it's forbidden.
Right. Oh, so if there's no, like forgetting a Mavoy, if there's a well and it dries up, and surrounded by those 4 corners,
no good.
It dries up,
you're out.
So that would be bad, because what if you didn't know and you went in?
That's right.
And you carried it.
You have to check before you go in.
So then,
But if it was dried on Shabbat,
Yeah, then it gets canceled in the middle of Shabbos. The morning, while there was water, is okay. Now that there's no water, it's not okay.
Yeah, but what happens if it does it 3-4 times?
Doesn't matter. When there's water, it's good. No water, it's bad. That's what I'm saying. Yeah,
So then,
you have to check.
Yeah, but you can't go in.
You can go in on your own. You just don't carry anything. Yeah, just walk in, check, and come back.
so basically because it's a Carmelite, the four corners, like you can't carry from one Carmelite to another through a
Where in this case,
private domain, yeah.
here the reason is because these two courtyards cannot carry into each other, and we have a rule that when two domains cannot carry into each other, they also can't carry into the shared domain.
Yeah, they can't carry it through another
Right,
secondary.
unless they make an Eruv. If they make an Eruv, then it's fine.
And then it all becomes one.
Exactly. Halacha lamed hey achsadra bebika. If you have an enclosed area in the middle of nowhere, it's middle of a massive field, and you put up 3 walls and a roof. Mutar taltel bikula. You can carry in the whole area. Ba'afal pi shehi bat shalosh mechitzot betikra. Even though it only has 3 walls and a roof. She'anu ro'in ki ilu pi tikra yored v'sotem ruach revit. Because we have a rule that the edge of a roof is considered to be a wall. It goes down and it shuts the 4th direction. V'hazorek. And therefore, if you throw mershut harabim l'tocha, from the public domain into this little achsadra, this little area, this patio, patur, you're exempt. Because orek lemavoy satum sheyesh lo korah, like one who would throw into a closed alleyway that has a crossbeam. Bayit o chatzer shenifratz keren zavit shala be'ester amot. If you have a home or a courtyard whose corner broke at a distance of 10 amot. Hareza asur utaltel bikulo. Now you cannot carry anywhere in this area. Afal pisha kol pirtza shehi ad ester amot kepetach. Even though technically every opening up to 10 amot is considered like a doorway. Eino sin petach bekeren zavit. Like we saw yesterday, doorways aren't made at the corners.
The wall's broken.
So it's like 2 walls are broken, now the whole thing's down. But if you do have a korah going across the diagonal breakage, then it is considered to have gone down and shut down the wall. And you can carry there. And the next 4 words are only there in some of the versions of the Rambam. So long as it's not diagonal. Now, what does it mean not diagonal? So the commentaries say it means that it can't be diagonal to the way that all the other beams are set up. You know, you have because here we're talking about a courtyard, but we're also talking about a house. If you have a house whose all its beams are going diagonally, then this additional crossbeam can be the one to shut the wall. But if all the beams are going this way, and the crossbeam is going the other way, then it's no good. But other texts don't even have these 4 words, and it's fine. It says that I'm a general rule to close this chapter. Ha'etzba. When we talk about fingers, shemisharin ba b'chol makom, that we use in every place in halacha, it has to be 4 fingers thick. What's a finger in halacha? Hirochav agudal shel yad. It's the thickness of the thumb. The hatefach. When we talk about a tefach, we mean arba etzbaot, 4 finger breadths. B'chol amah ha'amura b'chol makom. Whenever we use the word amah, cubit, bein b'shabbat, bein b'sukkah v'kilayim. Whether when it comes to Shabbat, in these cases, 4 amot in a public domain. Whether when it comes to a sukkah has to be a certain height and width and depth, or kilayim, the distance between certain plants, to not consider them mixed, has to be by certain amot. Whenever we use the amma, hi amma bat shishat tfachim. It's the amma that's 6 tfachim long, so 24 finger breadths. Upa'amim nish'arin ba'amma bat shishat tfachim d'chukot zulazu. Sometimes in halacha we say that the 6 hand breadths should be very stuck to each other. Upa'amim nish'arin ba'amma bat shisha sochakot urevuchot. Other times we use an amma which is 6 tfachim, but kind of looser, a bigger amma. In each case, we adopt a more stringent way. What does that mean? Ketzah, what does that mean? Meshech mavoy, the depth of an alleyway has to be 4 amot. We use arba amot sochakot, loose 4 amot. That's more of a stringency. It requires to be longer. Right? If I had 4 amot stuck together, that's shorter than 4 amot that are loosely. So you have to have 4 amot that are loose. The govho, the height of a mavo, cannot be more than 20 amot. So here we say 20 tight amot. Esrim amah atzevot. The moment you reach 20 tight amot, it's forbidden. Rochav hapirtza, the opening of a breakage. Eser amot atzevot. The minute you have 10 pressured amot, that's already 2 broken and it cancels the wall. And the same rule should be followed when it comes to sukkah and mixture of plants. Whenever it's more stringent, go with the loose ones. Whenever it's more stringent, you go with the tight ones.